The doctor asked me the date, and before I could even answer, my son sighed and said, "She gets confused lately." He wasn't just interrupting me, he was building a case. The word confused hit harder than the bright urgent care lights. I knew the date. I knew the year. I knew exactly why we were there. I'd stood up too fast in my kitchen that morning, felt the room tilt, and grabbed the counter until it passed. It scared me, yes, but it was one dizzy spell, not the end of my mind. Hearing my own child speak over me like I was a broken radio sent a sharp crack through my chest. I forced a smile at the doctor and answered anyway. Clear and steady, like this was a test I had to pass. Month, day, year, where we were, who the president was. I watched the doctor nod, but I could feel my son's eyes on me, waiting for me to slip. That hurt more than the blood pressure cuff squeezing my arm. It felt like he was quietly hoping I'd fail, wearing that worried expression like a mask. On the drive in, he'd called me Mom the way he used to when he was little, soft and sweet. "Mom, you scared me," he'd said, his hand on my arm as he buckled my seatbelt like I was the child. "You almost fell. What if you'd hit your head? We just want you safe." Those words should have comforted me, but something tight lived underneath them. The way he kept saying "we" instead of "I" made me feel like there had been conversations about me that I was never invited to. "Mom's been a little off for a while," he told the nurse while I sat on the paper-covered bed, repeating things, forgetting names, getting dizzy. Each phrase landed like a small betrayal. I wanted to list the bills I still paid, the recipes I still cooked from memory, the birthdays I never missed. Instead, I sat there with my cheeks burning, because arguing would make me look exactly like what he was describing. When the doctor stepped out, my son reached into his bag and pulled out a manila envelope. That surprised me. I thought we were here to check my blood pressure and send me home. He smoothed the papers with a careful hand, the way he used to smooth his homework on my kitchen table. "Mom," he said gently, "we've been talking about this for a while. With you feeling dizzy and mixing things up, it's time to be practical. This is a medical power of attorney. It just means if you ever can't make decisions, I can help. Just in case. We thought it would be easier for everyone." Mixing things up, another small cut. I remembered the one time I'd told him the wrong time for dinner, exhausted after scrubbing the house. He'd never let it go, turning one moment into a pattern. I looked down at the form and the legal words blurred at the edges. I heard my old voice in my head, the one that always scolded me. "Don't be dramatic. Don't be difficult. Good mothers don't make trouble. Good mothers are grateful when their children help." He pointed to the signature line. "It's just a formality," he said. "All my friends did this for their parents. We just want to be sure you're taken care of. You know how the system is. This protects you. Just a formality." The phrase stung. My life, my choices, my body, reduced to a form. I searched his face for the boy who fell asleep on my shoulder during fireworks, the teenager who called from college just to hear my voice. Instead, I saw a man watching me like a project he needed to complete. I felt small and stubborn at the same time. Part of me wanted to push the papers away and say, "I'm still here. I'm still me." Another part, the tired part that had apologized her whole life, whispered that saying no would make me selfish, ungrateful, difficult. He reminded me he'd taken the day off work. He'd driven me. He was only trying to help. Every word carried the same message. I owed him. My hand shook when I picked up the pen. I told myself it was the leftover dizziness, the cold air in the exam room, not fear, not doubt. I signed my name and tried not to notice how quickly he gathered the pages afterward, how practiced the motion looked, like he'd done it in his head 100 times. With one signature on that medical power of attorney, he gained control over my doctors and my medications, and though I didn't know it yet, the thin walls around my bank accounts and my independence. He thought he had wrapped me in concern and filed me neatly away under confused. He thought the story was finished. He didn't know I still had one phone call left. The changes started small enough that I almost missed them. At first, it was just a phone call here and there, conversations I didn't learn about until after they were already finished. My friend Linda would say, "You sounded tired on the phone, so I figured I'd let you rest," and I would smile and nod even though I'd never told her I was tired. Later, I'd hear my son in the kitchen, speaking in that low, calm voice. Yeah, Mom's been worn out lately. I'll let you know when she's up for visitors. Each word felt like someone quietly closing a door in my face. The next time I tried to meet my church group for lunch, he appeared at my bedroom door with the same worried expression. Mom, I already called them, he said. I told them you weren't feeling up to it. You almost lost your balance yesterday. You don't need to be driving across town. I already called Cut the Deepest. He didn't ask how I felt. He decided for me. It was like I'd been moved from the driver's seat of my own life to the back row without anyone bothering to tell me. His "you don't need to" sounded less like care and more like control, but I swallowed my protest. I didn't want to be called stubborn or ungrateful. One morning when I went to open the front door, my key stuck. I twisted and twisted until my hand ached. Finally, I punched a new code into the keypad he'd installed without asking. I remembered him saying, "We changed the locks, Mom. It's safer this way. You could misplace your keys." That sentence kept echoing in my head. I'd kept track of house keys, car keys, and office keys for decades. I'd locked that door through storms and power outages. Now suddenly I was the person who might misplace things. The new lock didn't feel like safety. It felt like a message. This isn't fully yours anymore. He started coming to my doctor's appointments with me, holding my purse, answering questions before I could. "She's been forgetful," he'd say with a sad little smile. "We're just trying to keep an eye on her." I sat there feeling smaller and smaller, like the chair was shrinking beneath me. Every time he said "we," it reminded me there was a "they" somewhere, talking about me, planning for me, while I still cooked dinners and folded laundry like nothing had changed. The worst blow came when I called to confirm my appointment with Dr. Harris, the doctor who'd seen me through surgeries, flu seasons, and pulled muscles. The receptionist spoke gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your son called and said you were transitioning care. Your new doctor is closer to his house." I stared at the phone, heat rising in my face. Embarrassment tangled with anger. He had transitioned my care like I was a file being moved from one cabinet to another. He didn't tell me. He didn't ask me. He decided. And the loss of Dr. Harris, someone who looked at me like a person, not a problem, hurt more than any test result ever had. At family gatherings, the language around me shifted in a way that made my skin prickle. My son would say, "Mom, remember. We talked about this yesterday in front of everyone, as if I'd already forgotten." If I paused for a second, searching for a name or a word, he'd pat my hand and say, "It's okay. She gets mixed up sometimes." His tone was gentle, almost kind, but the words felt like labels stuck to my forehead. Mixed up, confused, tired. It was like he was rewriting my story out loud while I was still sitting there, perfectly capable of hearing every line. I couldn't stop thinking about the years before this, when everything had gone the other way. I remembered late shifts, counting tips at the kitchen table while he slept, putting every spare dollar into a college fund instead of buying myself new shoes. I remembered repainting his room 3 times in one summer because he kept changing his mind about his favorite color. I remembered sewing curtains for his first apartment, sending care packages, co-signing loans, paying surprise bills when he called me stressed and overwhelmed. Back then, he trusted me with everything. He called me for advice. He believed I was strong. Now, when he talked about me, it was like I'd become something fragile. "She can't keep track of all this," he told a bank teller once while I stood beside him holding my purse. "That's why I'm handling things now." The teller gave me a polite, sympathetic look that made my stomach twist. I wanted to say, "I handled everything long before you could tie your shoes." Instead, I smiled, small and tight, and signed where they pointed, feeling anger burn in my chest like a low flame no one else could see. The shock of it sat inside me like a stone. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I moved through my days in a deep silence, watching each small change pile into something heavy. Every canceled lunch, every "mom's too tired," every gentle pat on my hand. Disrespect wrapped in concern, and the heartbreak was a strange one. Realizing the same child I once protected now spoke about me as if I were already gone, while I sat there, perfectly present, listening to every word. The first real crack showed itself at the bank. I was standing beside my son at the counter, my handbag tucked under my arm like always, when I heard him tell the young employee, "I'm her medical decision maker, and honestly, she's slipping. We need to get ahead of things before the court has to get involved." The way he said slipping turned my stomach. I was right there, breathing the same air, and he spoke about me like a problem to manage. Each word felt like a small shove, pushing me farther from my own life. The employee gave me the polite look I'd grown to hate, then turned back to her screen. "Of course," she said. "Once the conservatorship is in place, it will be simpler for you to manage everything." That word hit me hard. Conservatorship. I'd never heard it used about me before. It sounded cold, like something for a person who was gone in every way except on paper. My cheeks burned. I hadn't agreed to anything like that. I'd signed a medical form just in case, and somehow it had grown teeth. I opened my mouth. "What conservatorship?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted, but I forced the question into the air. My son's hand landed on my shoulder, gentle, firm, like he was steering a child away from traffic. "Mom, it's just a legal thing," he said smoothly. "Don't stress. We're making sure everything is handled if you can't. You know how you get confused with the bills." That line cut deep one late payment months ago when I'd been sick with a cold, and he'd turned it into a character trait. You know how you get. Like I was broken by design. Heat rose in me, thick and sharp, but I swallowed it because people were watching. A manager walked over, a woman about my age with kind eyes. "Why don't I print a summary for you, ma'am?" she said, looking directly at me. The simple act of addressing me, not talking around me, felt like a lifeline. She handed me a sheet of paper. I saw my son's name next to phrases like authorized signer and primary contact. My name was still there, but it suddenly looked smaller on the page. When he slid a form toward me, I signed, out of habit more than understanding, and that scared me most of all. Later that week, while he was out running errands for us, my phone rang. It was the manager. "I just wanted to make sure you're comfortable with these changes," she said gently. "Sometimes families move fast. You still have the right to ask questions. Still have the right." My chest tightened. Somewhere inside those words was a warning. I thanked her, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall. Her call dragged up a memory I'd tried to bury. I was 18 again, standing in my father's living room while he waved a stack of bills in my face. "You'll mess it up," he told me when I asked to open an account in my own name. "You're not good with money." He took my paycheck for safekeeping. I remembered leaving that house with one suitcase and $40, promising myself no one would ever speak to me like that again. Sitting at my kitchen table now, hearing my son use the same kind of language, felt like a cruel replay of a life I thought I'd outgrown. The unfairness stole my breath. I'd paid for his braces, his books, his rent when he was starting out. I'd bought him a used car so he could get to work. I had carried everything then, so how had I ended up here, being treated like I couldn't be trusted with a single dollar? I picked up my old tablet, the one he assumed I barely knew how to use. My hands shook, but I opened my email and searched his name. There it was, a thread he'd forgotten to delete after forwarding me an appointment confirmation. Down below, in an earlier message, I saw his words to someone at a law office. "We need to talk about full guardianship or conservatorship. She's getting worse. I already have medical power, but we need to lock this down before she does anything reckless." My vision blurred. Lock this down, reckless. I'd been careful my whole life, saving small amounts, making lists, paying on time. To see myself described like that by my own child felt like a punch I never saw coming. I could have called him right then. I could have poured every angry word out of my chest. Instead, I chose quiet, not for him, but for me. I needed to understand exactly what was happening before I showed my cards. For the first time, silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. I called Linda, my old neighbor, the one who'd retired from work at a law office downtown. "I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I told her about the medical form, the bank visit, the email. She listened without interrupting, which was more kindness than I'd felt in months. "There's a difference," she said at last. "A power of attorney is something you sign. As long as you can still make decisions, you can change it or revoke it. Guardianship or conservatorship is a court order. That's when you really lose control. You don't want that if you can help it." Her words snapped everything into focus. I replayed them slowly in my mind. I can revoke it, as long as I'm still able. All this time, I'd been acting like the story was already written, like that signature in the exam room was the end of my choices. It wasn't. Not yet. That night, after my son went to bed, I pulled the metal box down from the closet shelf. Inside were the papers he'd asked me to sign over the past year. I sat on the floor and read every line with a calm I didn't recognize. The medical power of attorney. Bank forms I barely remembered, each one sliding a little more control in his direction. With every page, the hurt built. But something else grew alongside it. A thin, sharp line of strength. He had been talking about me like I was already gone. But the woman reading those papers was very much here, thinking clearly. The next morning he said, "Mom, I talked to a lawyer. It's just to protect you, and I heard it differently. Before, that sentence would have crushed me. Now I heard what he wasn't saying. Protect me from what? Protect what? And for whom?" I started watching him the way he'd been watching me. I noticed how he answered questions for me in front of other people, how he kept my mail in a separate pile I never saw unless I asked, how he described me on the phone, using words that made me sound like I lived in a fog. The resentment was still there, but it changed shape. It stopped feeling like a weight and started feeling like fuel. Sitting alone at the kitchen table with Linda's words in my head and those papers spread out like a map, something inside me settled. I was done being the silent subject in someone else's story. I did not raise a child, sacrifice sleep and money and years of my life, just to hand over the last of my dignity without a fight. I was still here. I was still competent. And now I was awake. After that night at the kitchen table, papers spread out, the truth finally plain, I stopped arguing in my head and started moving. On the outside, nothing changed. I still let him drive me to appointments. I still let him speak for me in front of other people. But inside, I was done being helpless. I realized my greatest advantage was simple. He believed I was already beaten. The next morning he came in wearing that practiced, serious face. "Mom, I talked to a specialist," he said, setting his coffee on my table like he owned the room. "They have a treatment program for memory issues. It's not a big deal. Just some tests, some brain exercises. We need to get you evaluated. If they say you need a facility later, it's better to be ahead of it." Every word felt like a shove. Treatment, need, facility. He spoke like the decision was already made, like my life was a plan he was managing. My resentment lit up, sharp and steady, at how easily he used those words. He didn't say, "If you want this." He said, "We need to." I made my face soft. "If you think that's best," I said quietly. The sentence tasted bitter. Agreeing with him twisted my stomach, but it was a choice this time, not surrender. I watched his shoulders loosen. He looked almost pleased, like he'd finally gotten me to cooperate. That look hurt more than anything he said. It told me he didn't even see the woman in front of him anymore, only a problem he believed he had under control. Over the next week, he kept talking about next steps. At dinner, he said, "Once we get you evaluated, it'll be easier for the court if we need more support in place." The word court made my heart pound, but I nodded like we were planning a simple trip. Inside, resentment rolled through me. He was already thinking about legal control while pretending this was only about my health. Every time he said "for you," I heard "for me." I started writing down his comments in a small notebook I kept in my cardigan pocket. Dates, times, exact words. Not to punish him later, just to remind myself I wasn't imagining any of it. Then he told me he was going on vacation. "I booked a week in Florida," he said, scrolling through photos on his phone. "I need a break. Taking care of everything for you has been a lot." The way he framed it, like I was a job he needed time off from, stung. I'd taken care of him for years without breaks, working 2 jobs and still making dinner. Now he wore his help like a badge, and under the hurt, a thin line of relief cut through. A full week without his eyes on every move I made. "I'll ask the neighbor to check in," he added. "Just don't touch any of the mail or call the bank while I'm gone. I'll handle that when I get back." That last sentence sharpened my resentment. He spoke to me like a child warned not to touch the stove. Every limit he placed on me, every "I'll handle it," only made my decision feel more right. The morning after he left, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and my phone. My hands shook a little, not from confusion, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I called Linda first. She answered on the second ring. "I'm ready," I told her. No quiver this time. She gave me the name and number of an independent psychiatrist she trusted. Someone who didn't know my son, someone who would see me, not his story. When I called the office, the receptionist asked, "Who is making the appointment for you?" I heard my son's voice in my head, always answering that question for me. "I am," I said. Two words, and a small rush of strength moved through my chest. I told her I wanted a full competency evaluation. She didn't argue. She didn't question my clarity. She simply gave me a time and an address. After months of being spoken over, that plain respect nearly brought me to tears. I wiped my eyes. I didn't have time for crying. On the day of the evaluation, I dressed in the clothes that felt most like me: comfortable shoes, a neat blouse. I brought a folder with my notes and a list of medications, prepared the way I used to prepare for work meetings. The office was quiet, soft chairs, diplomas on the wall. The doctor looked me in the eye when he spoke, not at some imaginary person behind me. We went through questions, memory, problem solving, everyday reasoning. I answered clearly and calmly. Each correct answer felt like reclaiming a small piece of ground. At one point, he asked, "Why did you request this evaluation yourself?" A lump rose in my throat, but my voice stayed steady. "Because someone I love is speaking about me like I'm already gone?" I said, "and I'm not." He nodded and took notes. He never once treated me like I was being dramatic. When he finally said, "In my opinion, you are fully capable of making your own decisions," relief spread through me. Not joy exactly, but something cooler, solid. A few days later, I picked up the letter. A written statement of competence, signed and stamped. I held it for a long moment. Anger and satisfaction braided together. Anger that I needed a stranger to confirm what I'd always known. Satisfaction that I now had something my son couldn't twist with his tone. After that, everything moved in a straight line. I called a notary and made an appointment. I also called my sister. We didn't agree on everything, but she had a backbone my son couldn't push through. When I told her what had been happening, she went quiet. "I'll be there," she said. "No lecture, no." "Are you sure?" "Just support." It soothed a part of me that had been raw for months. At the notary's office, I laid the old medical power of attorney on the table beside the new documents. The notary explained each line, and this time I listened to every word. I signed the form that revoked my son's authority. Then I signed a new one naming my sister instead. With each signature, something unhooked inside me. No fireworks, no scene, just a calm, steady balance returning. That night, my son texted from the beach. A photo of the ocean followed by, "Hope you're behaving, Mom. Don't worry, I'll fix everything when I'm back." The word behaving sparked the same old resentment, but it also almost made me smile. He thought he was still in charge. He didn't know that while he was gone, the ground had shifted completely. For the first time in a long time, I went to bed feeling not just angry or afraid, but quietly in control. The day he came back from Florida, the house felt different to me, even though nothing had moved. I was at the kitchen table with my notebook and a cup of tea when he walked in, tanned, relaxed, dropping his bags by the door. "Hey, Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Did you behave while I was gone?" That word again, behave, made my jaw tighten. I wasn't a teenager he'd left home alone. I was the woman who raised him. I smiled anyway. "I managed," I said. He went right into his routine, opening drawers, flipping through my mail, checking the pill box he'd set up. "Good," he said, like I'd passed a test. "You didn't change anything. I'll go by the bank this afternoon, move some funds around, set up automatic payments for your treatment. You don't have to worry about any of that. Move some funds. You don't have to worry. Soft words, hard control." He didn't ask what I wanted. He told me what he would do. Resentment stirred, but it sat beside something steadier now. He truly had no idea his power had already been taken away. From the doorway, I watched him grab his folder of documents, the same folder he'd once used to make me sign papers I barely understood. "I'll be back in an hour," he said, already halfway out the door. "Don't tire yourself out." That line dug in deep. I'd watched him sleep on my couch for weeks when he was between jobs, and I never told him not to tire himself out. I only nodded, letting him believe he still held the pen. When the door shut, I took a slow breath, picked up my purse, and called my sister. "We're on our way," she said. My lawyer was already waiting at the bank. We got there before my son and sat in a small office with the manager and my attorney. My heart pounded, not from confusion, but from the weight of what this moment meant. When my son walked in and saw me sitting there, calm and ready, his eyebrows shot up. "Mom, what are you doing here?" The surprise in his voice carried a thin layer of irritation, like I'd stepped somewhere I didn't belong. It stung, but it also confirmed everything I'd written in my notebook. He truly believed my life was his to manage. The manager invited him to sit. He didn't. He went straight to the counter and slid his old power of attorney across the glass. "I need to withdraw from my mother's accounts for her treatment," he said. "I'm her agent. We're looking at a facility soon." Hearing him say facility while I sat 10 feet away made my chest ache. He was still telling that story about me, still painting me as someone who couldn't speak. I watched the teller glance toward the manager, then toward my lawyer, then back at me. For the first time in a long time, someone looked at me, not through me. "Sir," the manager said gently, "this document is no longer valid. Your mother revoked your authority. She has appointed a new agent." His face changed. Confusion, disbelief, then anger. Months ago, that look would have crushed me. Now I just watched. "That's impossible." He snapped. "She can't do that. She's not capable of understanding any of this. Not capable." The words cut, even though I expected them. After everything I'd done, he stood there in public saying I couldn't even think for myself. The resentment burned hot, but my voice stayed calm. "I understood it well enough," I said from behind him. The room went quiet. He turned like he was seeing a stranger. "I had a full evaluation," I continued. "I chose to change my papers. You do not speak for me anymore." Saying it out loud felt like setting down a weight I'd carried for years. His mouth opened and closed. "You're being manipulated," he said at last, pointing toward my sister and my lawyer. "They're turning you against your own son, after everything I've done for you." There it was. His favorite line. "After everything I've done," as if love meant I owed him my freedom forever. The manager stayed calm. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step away from your mother's accounts," she said. "You are not authorized to access them. If you refuse, I will have to call security." He talked over her, insisting the bank was wrong, raising his voice just enough to draw attention. "You're all going to regret this," he said. "She can't handle her own money. She's confused." Each denial stung, but it also proved exactly why I had done this. When he refused to move, security came, polite but firm, and guided him toward the door. I watched my own son be walked out of the same bank I once took him to when he opened his first savings account. My heart hurt, but I didn't look away. That evening, the calls and messages started. First came anger. "I can't believe you did this to me," he wrote. "People are going to think I'm some kind of monster." Even then, he made it about himself, how it looked, how it felt. Not once did he say, "I'm sorry I scared you." Then came guilt. "Family doesn't treat each other like this. You're letting outsiders come between us." A cousin posted something online about ungrateful parents who don't appreciate their kids. I knew exactly who that was aimed at. The words still hurt, but they didn't stick the way they used to. They passed through me. When I replied at all, I kept it short. "My decisions are final. I am safe. Please speak to my attorney." Each time I refused to write a long defense, I felt stronger. I didn't owe anyone a full report of my pain. Silence now wasn't fear, it was protection. With my lawyer's help, I filed a formal complaint for elder abuse and updated my will. Removing his name from my estate documents was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every page carried years of birthdays and holidays. And also, the nights I cried in my own kitchen because my child spoke about me like I was already gone. I wasn't cutting him out to be cruel. I was drawing a line so clear no one could pretend not to see it. I chose to protect myself and whatever years I had left. Not long after, I sat alone on my porch with a light blanket and a cup of tea. My phone buzzed with a new message, but it wasn't from him. It was from someone at the psychiatrist's office. "Thank you for standing up for yourself," it read. A lot of people in your place are too afraid to speak. Your strength matters. I read that line 3 times. Someone with no stake in my money, my house, or my papers had looked at me and called me strong. I looked around my quiet home and let the stillness settle. I took my own medicine, checked my own calendar, and locked my own door. I was alone, yes, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. And I finally understood I didn't have to earn love by giving away my life. If someone refused to love me without control, then my refusal was its own kind of love. Love for myself and for the part of me that still believes it is never too late to take your story back.